So what is it you're trying to do on that particular piece of cropland? And I visited several individuals in the hall here and that who have haying operations. Well, they have no armor on the soil because they're removing it all year after year. So you're going to want to add armor to the soil surface. Are you trying to build organic matter? And I discussed this morning the importance of that organic matter for nutrient cycling, for holding water. I think it's key that everyone here gets in their mind the realization you have to plan not only for this year, but 5 years out, 10 years out, 20 years out. You're going to see a huge demand on your water with what happens in California and downstream, etc. You might as well face reality now. You're not going to be the ones dictating that. It's going to be dictated by consumers, customers, businesses downstream. Because political pressure will come back, and we are a smaller population. We're going to get it imposed on us. This is the way you will farm and ranch. And Dave said it as far as the nitrates. You know, they're going to start imposing on us restrictions upstream. That they're not going to want that in the watershed. Look what's happening in Iowa, you know, with the city of Des Moines suing the upstream farm producers because of excess nitrates moving in the system. I had the opportunity to visit with several of those producers. Like I told them, why would you want to let your nitrogen go downstream? Hold it on your land with covers, and Jay talked about that. So this is a list of some of those resource concerns. You absolutely have to figure out your resource concern before you plant the cover crop. So I applaud the NRCS here in moving cover crops forward in this area. Take the time to study and figure out what your resource concern is first, and then you apply that on each specific field. You know, we have approximately 2,000 acres of cropland on our operation. Of that, I'd have to add up the number of fields, but it's probably somewhere around 60 or so fields. I will seed a different cover on each one of those different fields. And it's not that much work once you wrap your mind around it. So, I mentioned this morning the 5 keys to achieving a healthy soil. These are those 5 again. I'm not going to go through them, but they are extremely, extremely important. And I don't care where I speak, whether it be Australia or Canada or Colorado, these principles are the same everywhere, and they work everywhere. So, might as well learn them and use them to your advantage. Now, one thing about covers, when we design the mixes, where do I have a production gap? Now, there's 2 ways to look at that. Do I have a production gap in my cash grain where there's nothing growing? Because we always want something growing whenever possible. Or do we have a forage gap? For those of us with livestock, this plays an important role too. And all I did here was lay out a scenario. You look at what do you have available. Okay, a lot of the producers in this area are going to graze up on the mountain. They're going to graze federal allotments, etc. That'll fill the forage chain for part of the year, but not the rest of the year. How can we integrate our operations, the cropland, hayland, and our rangelands, so that we complete that forage chain to allow the livestock to have proper nutrition throughout the whole year? You have to diversify. It's really hard to improve soil health if you don't have diversity. I mentioned this morning that I spend a lot of time talking in the Corn Belt. Well, Gabe, we want to plant covers. Okay, well, we plant corn and beans, that's all we want to plant. Can't you stretch the rotation a little bit? Plant corn, beans, and winter wheat? Then you can get some covers growing in that time slot following winter wheat. You know, I know that in this environment, you only have so many frost-free days. But that's why I'm the same in my environment. We grow full season covers. Jay mentioned it in his presentation, the case study, how the Blackleg Ranch is growing full season covers. And then rather than putting up hay, they're just allowing the cattle to graze it. We have to think outside the box to be willing to diversify in order to improve the resource. Talked about the 4 different crop types. Here's some cool season grasses and cool season broadleaves. And it's not limited to this. There's many, many more. And you can find that out. A real good website is SARE, S-A-R-E. And they have a book on there that's available for download free called Farming Cover Crops Profitably. Download that, and it'll list these species. It'll tell you, you know, when their season of growth is, advantages, disadvantages. It's good to study things like that and find out, do the trials, find out what works on your operation. So there's some of the cool seasons, here's some of the warm seasons. You can't expect in this environment that you're going to have a lot of warm seasons in this mix. You know, you're in a predominantly cool season environment, just like I am. So most of the mixes are going to be cool season. Most of your cash crops are going to be cool season. In saying that, there's definite windows of time we can incorporate some warm seasons. And that's to the benefit of the soil and to our pocketbook. So these are just some of the cover crops that I grew on my operation this past year. Again, like I said this morning, don't pay attention to the species. Just notice I have some of all 4 crop types. And we'll mix and match these according to the resource concern on each particular field. Now, I'm not promoting any certain cover crop company here. I want to make that clear. I'm just giving you some ideas of where you can learn more about covers. Green Cover Seeds has an excellent website. They have a smart mix calculator, and I'll go through that a little bit in a minute. It's a fun tool to play with, doesn't cost any money, but it helps producers start to understand how to design mixes, how to look at carbon-nitrogen ratios, and Jay's going to talk more about that, how to address your resource concerns. So go to that. Midwest Cover Crop Council has some really good information on their website. Sarah, like I said, there's a lot of seed suppliers now that are really delving into this cover crop business. And here's how I vet seed suppliers. I go to them, I call them up or drop by their store, and first they always ask your name, but then if you get talking to them about the cover crops, if they don't ask you, what's your resource concern? Walk out the door or hang up the phone, because they don't have your best interest at heart. You know? Don't go to a seed supplier who just wants to sell seed. They have to understand what resource concerns are and how to develop mixes accordingly. I'll just say one other thing briefly. I really do not like these generic mixes that some of these cover crop seed companies sell, because they may or may not address your resource concerns. So just be leery of some of those. Here is just a picture of the Smart Mix calculator. And I don't have a highlighter, but up top there, right under the word Smart Mix, it has carbon-nitrogen ratio. It has winter grazing up there. It has salinity requirements. What you do is you go on their website, you have to register, and it'll ask you your zip code. And it automatically plugs into the closest National Weather Service to you. That way it can design mixes based on your locality, your growing degree days, your precipitation, etc. And then it's going to ask you your resource concerns. What are your resource concerns? And you can type in up to 3 of them. And then it'll rank the cover crops according to your resource concerns. Now realize this is a broad overview. They can't tell exactly how they'll work in your situation, but it'll guide you fairly closely. He's put a lot of time and work into this. Then you go over here on the left, and you can click on legumes, and it'll be a whole drop box of all the different legumes that they sell. And you just click on whichever one you want, put how many pounds you want to seed. It'll automatically do the calculation, seed per pound, and what the cost would be if you bought from them. And you can design your mixes, and then it'll automatically change the carbon-nitrogen ratio, the winter grazing, whatever your resource concerns. It'll tell you how this particular mix is going to work for you. So it's a really good way to play with mixes and to learn more about how to put mixes together. Doesn't cost anything. They've made it free, available to anyone. I have a lot of friends in Africa and Australia who use this for themselves. It works really good, no matter where you live. I want to get this clear right up front. Do cover crops use moisture? Of course they do. Some of us in this regenerative ag movement have been getting a lot of pressure lately saying, oh, we're out there saying that cover crops don't use moisture. Of course they use moisture. Anything growing will use moisture. What's key is, though, over time, it'll help your soils be able to store more moisture because you're going to be able to build organic matter. It'll actually cycle the moisture through too. You know, our soils can only hold so much water. And I talked about that this morning, the web soil survey, etc. We have to make our bucket bigger. We have to help our soils, grow our soils so that it can hold more water for when we need it. As this comes to be in future years, and you up here see more and more pressure on your water, you know, from downstream interest, you better be able to hold more up here. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to grow the crops you do. The time to start healing your soils is now. It's not tomorrow, it's not 10 years from now, it's now. What about yield drag? Here's one of the biggest issues. You have to realize that covers are living, growing things. Covers are made up of nutrients, just like we are. If you grow something extra on a piece of land, that's going to take nutrients from that land, but it's going to cycle it through. Too many people give covers a bad rap because they grow covers following a cash crop, and then the next year they plant their cash crop and they say, oh, I took a less yield, cover crops are bad. No, cover crops are cycling the nutrients. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to do. It just takes time for you to get a healthy system where that'll break down and cycle. Remember the photo I showed this morning of my residue disappearing so fastly, so quickly in that corn crop? That's because my system is now at such a point I can cycle those nutrients through very quickly. You can't expect to move into this system and have your soils do it that fast. Normally what we're seeing with producers as they move into covers, if they've been using synthetic fertilizers, you may need to increase them slightly and use the Haney test to determine that as you grow covers until your biology and your nutrient cycle gets to such a state that you can start cycling it through quicker. Then you wean yourself off. But the covers are doing exactly what they're supposed to do. Don't blame the covers. 99 times out of 100, if producers say, oh, covers don't work, it's because something they did wrong with management. It's not because of the covers. It's all about management. Now, I've got a lot on this slide. This is some tips that you just have to be aware of. First of all, you got to use species adapted to your environment. And I'll give you an example. When sun hemp first started coming into the country, I try everything. That's just what I do. So I planted sun hemp, and yes, I planted it right along the interstate, so all the people that wonder what I'm doing. And between the hippies and the highway patrol, there was a lot of screech marks on the highway. But anyway, sun hemp just doesn't work well in my environment. Sun hemp's a tropical legume, you know, so we don't use that anymore in our rotation. But you've got to use species that can work in your environment. It's up to you to find out whether or not those species can work in your environment, though. You got to be willing to try that. Adjust species composition to the season of use. And I'll give you an example of this. North Dakota State University, this was many years ago, they did a cover crop trial. And it was a 3-year trial. Well, they were planting cool season species in the middle of the summer. And they said, boy, this just isn't working. Well, duh. You know, it's not going to work. You're not going to plant field peas in the heat of July. It's just not going to work. You've got to make sure you have season of use, the correct species there. Diversity is best. And I'm not saying plant 70 species. I've planted over 70 species in a mix. You know, we don't have to do that. 2 is better than 1. 3 is better than 2. We really like to see you use 6 or 7. That is a good number to get a good interaction. You know, once you become familiar with these covers and know what works on your operation, you may want to expand it. But diversity is good. Herbicide residuals is key. Nowadays, the herbicides that they're using, if you're using herbicides on your operation, be careful. More and more of these chemical companies are becoming aware of covers, and they're starting to list on labels which ones can be used on or the herbicide carryover that particular herbicide will have as to how it affects covers. But be aware of that. Crop insurance is another one. That's why I recommend don't even do it, because it just stymies what you can do with covers. In saying that, I know the majority of producers are going to use crop insurance, but be aware of that. because it does have an effect on eligibility. Don't use a species in the mix if you are planning to seed it in that field the next year. That's just common sense, but to put it in there. You're not going to use oats as a cover crop in the fall if you're going to seed oats the next spring. You know, you don't want to have that bridge there. Okay, if grass finishing, do not allow any of the grains to go to seed. That's just common sense. The other one that I really am a believer in, it's not going to grow if it's in the bin. There's so many times I see a lot of my friends and people we work with that they're afraid to go seed a cover because we don't have moisture. Or, oh, I'm going to wait for it to be better. It's never going to have a chance to heal your soils if you don't get it in the ground and get something growing. There's many times I'll go out there. This last fall was an example. We were extremely dry. I was out there seeding covers when nobody else was for a long period of time. It won't have a chance to grow if it's not in the ground. And you'll be amazed how little moisture it really takes to germinate a lot of these things. Now I'm going to run through just a series of different symptoms and then how I would approach it with covers to heal that. So this is an actual photo my son took of me standing in the neighbor's ditch after a hard windstorm, and look at the amount of soil that blew in that ditch because he didn't have soil aggregation. And I showed the photo of this morning. I'm showing it again because it is that important. The difference between tillage and no-till is the effect on soil aggregates and soil biology. We need to reduce tillage passes in order that, look it up here on the table now. Look at the difference in these soils. It's amazing. You have to have soil aggregates. Ray Archuleta put this together, and I know he spoke here a few years ago. I'm sure he used this slide, but I really like it. He titled it, "This Soil is Naked, Hungry, Thirsty, and Running a Fever." Think about what just Jay and I explained this morning. That soil is not covered. It's naked. There's no armor on it. It's hungry. There's nothing there to feed the life, the biology within it, and it certainly has those high soil temps that affect that life in the soil. That's not how soil is intended to be. So what I do on a situation like that, whenever I take over any new land, the first thing I do is plant it in a very diverse mix. This is a mix that I used that works really well. It's a lot of diversity in it. As I said this morning, I'm accelerating biological time. I'm feeding that soil a very diverse diet. A lot of these species are mycorrhizal friendly, so we're propagating mycorrhizal fungi. This particular mix cost me $34 an acre just for the seed cost. A lot of people say, oh, that's high. Is it really? With the amount of dollars I'll be able to save with a healthy soil? There's a lot of different species you can use to build soil aggregates. These are just some of them that really work well. Your sorghum sudan grass, annual ryegrass, cereal rye, oats, millets, they all start formation of soil particles rapidly. Your broadleaves, radish, woolly pod vetch, sunflower, buckwheat, clovers, all of these are mycorrhizal friendly, with the exception of the brassica radish, and they will really help to build soil aggregates. We want to focus on mycorrhizal fungi. We want to focus on those species that can start this soil aggregate formation, because it is that critical. Just look at the table here. You know, which soil do you want? We all want the soil on your right. We know that. There's just a close-up. Look at the fungi in that soil. That looks like a white spider web moving through there. That's what's happening in a healthy soil ecosystem, transferring nutrients, forming new soil particles. Showed that one this morning. I put it on there again just to run it by you again so you sure and understand that mycorrhizal fungi can add significant dollars to your bottom line, and it'll do it for free. I also have on occasions planted mixes just to propagate mycorrhizal fungi in my fields. This is a particular case. I bought this land in 2002. It had been tilled for many, many, many years. First thing I did was go in there with this mix of species that are mycorrhizal friendly. Oats, barley, flax, clovers, sunflowers, they're all mycorrhizal friendly. then we can get the formation of soil particles. As a matter of fact, that land that had been tilled for so many years that I bought in 2002 is the same piece of cropland. Well, this photo was taken on the piece of cropland where the scientists were able to infiltrate those 2 inches in 25 seconds this morning. We changed that land from 2002 to 2015, which really isn't that long of a time period. You know, we took infiltration rates of less than an inch and moved them to that. You can do it if you focus on the soil. Okay, symptom of poor infiltration compaction. Matter of fact, this photo here was taken that rainfall event where I had that 13.6 inches and I showed you the pictures that Jay took. This was a picture of the neighbors about 3 weeks later. So he still had water sitting on his land 3 weeks later. Look, there's those pore spaces. Now is this starting to make more sense when you look at these PEDs that Jay put in the water here? It's all about infiltration. There's a lot of different species you can use. Sorghum Sudan grass is a really good one because of the amount of roots that it puts into the soil. Annual ryegrass would work. Cereal rye works well. Radish, turnip, sweet clover, and sunflowers have deep tap roots. They'll work too. You have to think of diversity below ground as well as above ground. This photo here was taken actually on that plot land where I showed you the dried up radishes and turnips this morning and then the diverse polyculture mix. This was a few years later on that land. We had a diverse cover crop mix there, and the soil district had a tour there. Jay will agree with me, that was one of the best things we did, digging that pit there, because people got to walk down and look at all the different roots in that soil. You know, and all these different cover crop species have different root types and different rooting depths, and you want to address all areas of the soil profile. We often see this when a person has been using tillage and then goes and plants a brassica. That 3 inches down, that was the tillage layer in this particular field. Look at the energy it took for that radish. It hit that tillage layer, moved horizontally until it could poke down through that hard pan. That's happening in your soil. How do we expect roots to get through that? And you'll find them. So we want to be able to alleviate that. That's where some of these brassicas really work well, is use them to poke holes in those hard pan areas. These can get really, really large. That's a radish on my place next to a tire on a government vehicle. I happen to know that for a fact. Look at the size of that. Now my friend David Brandt in Ohio, he grows really, really big radishes. So then I show him the size turnips we can grow in North Dakota. You know. This is what happens to a radish in the spring of the year though. Those brassicas, whether you're talking radish and turnips, they're nitrogen accumulators. So they'll scavenge nitrogen, and Jay talked about the importance of that, of holding those nitrogen on your land. You want to do that. You want to plant a brassica to scavenge them after your cash crop. It'll hold it, and then in the spring of the year, it'll break down very, very quickly, and that's all you have left is that hole. So you better have a crop growing to use that nitrogen early in the year. But that's a way to keep your dollars on your land. Don't let them be washed away downstream. Okay, too often people will start into no-till and they will say, oh man, I have all this residue. No-till doesn't work. My soils are too cold. I can't have this. If you look closely on this picture, you can see about 5 years of crops. And I know Jay's going to talk about carbon-nitrogen ratio, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But each plant has a different carbon-nitrogen ratio. And even we as humans have a carbon-nitrogen ratio. We're going to break down to about 10 to 1, 11 to 1 carbon-nitrogen ratio. The problem that this producer had, he was using all high-carbon crops. Because of that, he was getting a buildup of residue, and it wasn't breaking down. So all he had to do was go add lower carbon crops into his crop rotation, things such as peas, which have a much higher nitrogen ratio. Then the residue will cycle through. A lot of producers are not willing to change their crop rotation. Then they have a problem, and then what are they going to do? They're going to go out and till instead. There's ways we can work around that. You can use cash crops and cover crops to do it. Then along with the peas, you plant these brassicas to accumulate that nitrogen, and it'll break down very quickly. You can see the row of radishes there in the middle, just that hole. There's a lot of people in the Corn Belt now who will go out there and they will precision plant radishes in the fall. Then the next year they'll come in and plant their corn right along that row, because it has that corn seed, then will get that boost of nitrogen, that soil will be warmed up, and away they go. There's ways we can do all these things with covers. I took these photos off my place just this last spring. I had a cover crop of sorghum Sudan grass on the right. That was corn on the left. We had an open winter. Look at the difference in weed suppression this past spring. I did not have to use any herbicide where the sorghum Sudan cover crop was. I had to use a herbicide where the corn crop with a lack of covers was. Cover crops will suppress weeds too. Works extremely well. There's just another picture of it. Oops. Okay, this is a picture taken in Burleigh County that shows on the right there was a cover crop the previous fall. Oh, no, on the left there was a cover crop, on the right there was not. Look at that weed, those weeds the following spring. So there's all these benefits you can get. I know for a fact that cover crop fed livestock, so they converted it to dollars, but look, they were able to save a herbicide pass also the following spring. So there's multiple benefits that can come about from these covers. That's significant. That's putting a lot of dollars, leaving them in our pocket rather than writing checks. This is for my area. The best species I've seen for weed suppression on my operation: sorghum Sudan grass, annual ryegrass, cereal rye, oats. They work really well for weed suppression. Broadleaf weeds, buckwheat works really well. The radishes to some degree, clovers work well, hairy vetch, woolly pod vetch, those all work really well on my operation for suppressing weed. We try to use those in combinations on areas where we may have an issue with some weeds and we want to suppress it. Living root in the ground as long as possible. You must keep feeding that soil biology. You can't have bare soils. We got to be feeding them. You cannot afford to not have living roots. Fill every window where you can. There's many times where we might have a short window, say 60 days, without something growing. I'm going to be out there seeding some. A mix such as this, cowpea, proso millet, and buckwheat, in 45 days you can have really good ground cover. So don't think, oh, it's getting too late, here we are, it's August, I don't have time to seed something, or, you know, make sure that you get something growing out there. That's why I really recommend, for instance, in this area, the sweet corn growers, go out when you're done and get a rye cover crop established, winter triticale, hairy vetch, something like that. Get something growing out there in that window. There's a lot of these species that, you know, the panel that was up here talked about aerial application. You can certainly do that. You know, there's ways to get cover crops established so we can have a living root as long as possible. Buckwheat, besides being quick to establish, has many benefits. That flower there attracts pollinators, and it fills the time of the year when we probably don't have a lot of other species flowering. Buckwheat, the roots of a buckwheat plant also work real well to break down organic forms of phosphorus and convert them to inorganic. So it'll take rock phosphate and make it available to the plant. It's a species that can be used for that. Take advantage of it. I show this simple mix because this is one we started with a long time ago, and I want you to realize that covers don't have to be these complex mixes. If that doesn't fit your operation, at least plant two species. Plant a legume and a grass together. Take advantage of simple things like that. You know, I know way too many producers who plant the sorghum Sudan grass for hay, and they plant that as a monoculture. Why? Why not put a legume with it? It'll up the protein content of the feed, plus you're taking atmospheric nitrogen and making it available for that grass plant. Here's a simple warm season mix. This is one I use on my operation a lot because it has a lot of diversity to it, and it simply works in my environment. Works really well. And if you look at this, there's legumes in it, there's grasses in it, there's brassicas in it, there's deep-rooted crops such as the sunflower and the radish, there's buckwheat, which cycles phosphorus, like I just said, attracts pollinators. Safflower is in there. I don't know how familiar you are with safflower. Safflower is like a thistle almost. It has spines. Why would I put that in my mixes? Because cattle don't graze it. Snow is a big part of our moisture. So I want species out there that cattle won't graze that will help hold snow. You think this thing through. Also, safflower really attracts pollinators as well. So this is not a real costly mix. It's not a super diverse mix, but it's one that works extremely well in my operation. So you can develop these mixes on your operation that work pretty well. Here we took off an early harvest of oats. We combined the oats up. I went in there with a cover crop mix. We're going to get a killing frost in early September, but we can still have something living and growing on there. So here's one of the mixes. Here's a mix we seeded following the spring wheat harvest. This photo was taken October 8th. We had froze at least 30 or 40 times, but I still have flowering species. What I'm finding is happening on our operation, as soil health advances, our soils stay much warmer longer. And Jay made mention of that this morning. As you fill up the soil with biology, and you're not going to fill it up, but as you build biological numbers, it's just like us in this room. It's warming up. So I'm able to grow things much longer than most people in the area simply because of the biological activity in the soils. This is Phacelia. Phacelia is a cool season plant. Tremendous fibrous root system, so it'll help build organic matter, but it'll really attract the pollinator species. And here's just some of the species you can use to attract all the various insects and pollinators. If your symptom is pests, and I showed this slide this morning, I'm showing it again because it's that important. There's species you can plant. You have to provide a home for those predator and pollinator insects. That's just lady beetles, and I showed some of these this morning. One of the things I did for my son when he first got out of college is I bought him a waterproof camera. He carries that on his belt and carries it with him all the time. He's taking thousands of pictures during the summer of our operation. And it's amazing what you can learn when you go back and look at those pictures. You know, we don't use any insecticides on our cattle. And people don't realize all the spiders that are out in a healthy ecosystem. They're catching flies all the time. You have to develop a healthy ecosystem, and then that'll take care of all of these symptoms that you've been seeing. So, I think with that, for whatever reason, there's an overview of our operation, and I just showed this one. The light blue areas are cropland. The light green areas are those 1,000 acres of tame grass. It was cropland that was seeded back to tame grass. And then all the yellow outlined areas are our perennial pastures. And we integrate all of these together to develop a healthy ecosystem. Mike, how am I doing for time? Are we about done?
We're done.
Okay, I better stop then. Otherwise, I'll keep going on something else, and you'll never get me off the stage. So.
All right, let's give Gabe a round of applause, please. Thank you.